When the past was around as a point and click puzzle game with a fairly unique art style and feel due to the themes it's exploring. Regardless, once again, I'm here reviewing the Switch version of the game, which once again is interesting because of how the Switch handles point and click and how it takes advantage of the touchscreen. So this leads us then to start talking about the gameplay being primarily puzzle oriented, with the puzzles themselves being fairly simple for the most part. They're not totally brainless, which is good, but if you have ever played a game in this genre, then you'll find them fairly easy, with a couple of exceptions that did stump me, but not due to them being actually challenging puzzles, but due to a misguidance and somewhat poorly implemented touch controls, which was a bit jarring given the rest of the game, but also I must say that they're not that big of a deal because I don't feel like they diminished my overall experience with this game. But I do want to talk about them. Two specific moments. First, with the misguidance one. In a scene late in a game, so I'll try not to be spoilery about it, you are supposed to open a safe with a combination of four numbers, and above this safe plays a song with four notes. In the same scene, there is a book that translates notes into numbers. Do you see where I'm going? Well, this is not the solution to the puzzle. The solution, once again, minimal spoilers, has you counting objects in the foreground and background based on what otherwise would be very obvious symbols if it wasn't for that misdirection. That misdirection would not be so bad if those pieces of another puzzle would be useful in the same scene, so I could mentally just cut off the idea that they would be used for that puzzle. But they are not. They're used in a scene later on, which, fair enough, this wasn't the first time this was done, and especially this late into the game, it was a lot more justifiable. But I think it does also open it up for more criticism due to the way scenes are presented. It isn't always clear a puzzle will span for more than a scene, or that you'll be able to return to a previous area until you actually do it. And while this isn't inherently bad, but it can create situations like the one I just described where you feel like you're hitting a wall, interacting with an object that seems to resolve the puzzle but doesn't actually. This being exacerbated by the second issue I encountered in this game, that being the touch controls. Much like in later Alligator review, the biggest problem with using a touchscreen as a mouse is that your finger is a lot bigger than a mouse cursor, and so when trying to do some more precise clicking and dragging, it can become very finicky. And in that game, it was fine because that game was more of a visual novel with some mini games. But here, in a game with a much more traditional point and click style, leading to this problem happening a lot more often, and like I alluded to, this very specific point that I wanted to talk about. This one happening within the first 20 minutes of the game, so it's less of a spoiler. This was a small box on a table. Clicking it opens it, and then you must touch something inside it to obtain it as a puzzle item. The problem here is clicking the box also closes it, and with my finger, it felt impossible to differentiate between clicking the item and closing the box. And you can guess what the game prioritizes since I'm here criticizing it. Unfortunately, while this might be the worst case of it, it's still something that happens quite often and led me to play a lot more with the joystick instead for most of the game. Which is sad mostly because the game does have a mechanic that does help with this where you can press one of the shoulder buttons to see what you can interact with within an environment or scene, and that helps a lot with the touch experience given what would otherwise be covered by your finger when you're trying to click something. But also, this fix doesn't help the problem of the human finger just being a bit too big for precise clicking. For that, either the game would have to be built around it or maybe have some sort of zoom function that would expand the activation area of these smaller items. Regardless, not really my place to theorize, but it would be nice. And again, it's not the end of the world, mostly because you still have more classic controls here, which we will now talk about in a more generalized sense, as there isn't much to say about it without spoiling, as most of what you do is solve puzzles within a certain area to move on to the next area to push the story forwards. These are logic puzzles where you have a very basic initial objective like fixing a clock or opening a locked door, but then obtaining the pieces to fix that simple puzzle involve other puzzles to obtain them, working almost like a backwards branching tree. I'm sure there is a better word for it, but that's what I came up with. Overall, that's all this game really needs though. A very simple but engaging gameplay to propel the also simple story forwards, which, yes, means we're talking about the story now. The story of When the Past Was Around is almost entirely told through visuals with themes of loss and grief and love, with some slight abstract elements to it, and a big focus on music, especially violin music. And it's a pretty good story. It succeeds at the emotions it's trying to convey, and I'll say on a personal level that while this isn't really my cup of tea, I can totally see a lot of people enjoying it. And what really helps here convey these feelings is the visuals, with autumny pastel colors, even if it doesn't take place in autumn, and with a very gorgeous hand drawn art style. It does really help invoke a melancholy feeling. This is definitely the best part of the game because it doesn't just look great, it also fits great with its themes. It's in a way sad but beautiful. The soundtrack follows in the same footsteps, being very soft and calm, at the risk of repeating myself, adding to that feeling of melancholy with the already mentioned use of the solo violin, which also pertains to the story. It is aesthetically an amazing game with very simple but yet meaningful and emotional story. But it's also a very simple story and a very simple puzzle game. And on a more personal note, I think I might have not resonated as much with this game as I think other people will. And so that's my experience, and that's fine. And I'm giving When the Past Was Around a 7 out of 10. Recommendations now. I do recommend trying this game out if you enjoy the art style, but if you're looking for a point and click puzzle game, then this one might be a bit too simple for you. But on the bright side of that, this might be a fairly good game for people who don't usually play video games, given its simplicity. Now, platform wise, you can play this on pretty much every modern console, that being Switch, PS4, and Xbox One, and therefore also PS5 and Xbox Series. And well, of course, there's a PC version as well, which I would personally recommend, even if that's not the version of the game I played, mostly because it is a point and click game, and I just think those feel easier to play on PC, in my opinion. But it's up to you and what you feel most comfortable with. Regardless of your decision though, I hope this video helped you, and regardless of if it did, I hope that you consider subscribing, liking, and even commenting, all things you can do for free here on YouTube. And regardless of that, I hope you're having a good day, and goodbye.